And is there a certain behavior, is there a certain personality trait that is more susceptible?
And there absolutely is. I lectured at Brighton Hospital for 7 years, and I had an opportunity to screen over 8,000 patients. And one of the things that national tests show is that the majority of compulsive gamblers come from a substance abuse background or an addiction background and end up trading one addiction for another. So this is a subset that is really the one group of people I would say and tell them to stay away from gambling. I go around the country telling drinkers not to gamble and gamblers not to drink. You know, and the alcoholics think I'm crazy and the compulsive gamblers think I'm crazy. But well over 80% of the gamblers I've met in the last 7 years come from a substance abuse background. So those people must beware. Got to understand, when we talk about compulsive gambling, we're talking about 1% of the population. It's a very small percentage, but an extremely large number. And I think that when we do that, we understand that these people are coming from the substance abuse background. If we can get these people just not to begin gambling, I think that we can really do a lot of good.
Sure. Bernard, did you begin with some kind of an obsession that turned to scratch-off tickets?
For me, I had, when I wrote the book, I had to talk about what I saw back in my childhood. And I looked at different things. Eating was anything I did competitively that became out of hand became compulsive for me. And looking back on it, I did smoking, I did eating, you know, had a small bit where I did a little bit of drinking in college, but never let drinking get out of the hand. But the scratch-offs are so easy. The gambling is so easy, and that's how it starts. It starts out little, and people, when Mike talks about the addictive background, one of the places we don't think about it are things that are more socially acceptable. Somebody eating at a restaurant is socially acceptable. But you've got compulsive eaters, you've got situations like that. Emotions tend to drive it too.
Well, and you mentioned that you kind of worked in a store that sold these lottery tickets. I'm thinking that probably wasn't a great idea. I mean, you had access there, but at a certain point that you get to where you put out so much money to buy the tickets, and then if you're not getting a return on your dollar, the interest wanes. Apparently that did not happen with you.
No, because it was never about the money. It was always about the excitement, and for me, to some extent, avoidance, because I had a relationship that was kind of tough to deal with at times. And I didn't want to go home, so I'd sit there and gamble. Mm-hmm. And I stopped in 2007, but I still worked selling tickets until 2011. So I had 3 years where I was actually selling the tickets while I was staying sober myself, which...
Well, you're a tough guy then. That's quite a feat, huh?
It's every time you sold them, you end up having to tell what you knew was going on in your head. Because with the compulsive gambler, it's the next one's a winner. It doesn't matter whether it's winner money or not. It's just the next one's going to give you that rush you want. Mm-hmm. And so when somebody would come in and buy, and I'd see them buying lots of them, I'd say the next one's a winner to them. They'd look at me like I was reading their mind, and they'd kind of slow down a little bit for a few minutes, but then they'd pick right back up. You can't stop them until they're ready to quit.
All right.
I think so much of it is about perception. I went through Brighton Hospital myself back in 1978. And I remember back then most people thought of alcoholics as skid row bums. They thought of the park bench, and that's the way that they envisioned them. Now that's no longer true today. As a matter of fact, if you have a friend who's gone through a treatment center, the first thing you do is give them a little blue star to wear around and tell them how proud you are and all of that. I think that most people today, and they just did a recent study in Minnesota that showed that 66% of the people there think that compulsive gamblers should just stop gambling. And
that's an easy thing to say, isn't it?
Yeah. And they don't understand that it is an addiction. As a matter of fact, in the DSM-5 that's coming out in May, and that's the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, compulsive gambling is being included with all the substance abuses under the term addiction. It has nothing to do with the money. The money is our drug that gets us to the machines or the card tables or the tickets or whatever it is. I'll tell you a real interesting story that happened last week. I think we finally have a face that we can put on a compulsive gambler. The former mayor of San Diego, Maureen O'Hara, the first female elected mayor, the youngest city council member ever voted in, was discovered to have gambled between $35 and $45 million of her estate away, and then embezzled $2.5 million out of a trust fund that her husband had set up for charities. Now, obviously, this had nothing to do with money.
Yeah.
Now she's penniless. She's living with her sister. It's just a terrible, terrible devastation. But here's a woman who did more for the people in the city of San Diego, gave her entire life to doing nothing but working with people, helping people. And then in the end of her life, she lost her husband, she lost some of her family, and she turned to gambling as an escape. That's the face of the compulsive gambler. Mm-hmm. And that's normally what I see, especially in the high-profile cases. It's people who have access to these huge sums of money because they've given 20, 25, 30 years of their life doing good work.
Well, and what's particularly sad about that is that, as you mentioned, all the accomplishments that now will never be remembered. They'll remember her certainly as a gambler and an embezzler, and you actually had a very high-profile career yourself where you were extremely successful, and nobody would ever guess that you could fall victim to anything, yet one day it all came crashing down.
And that's the problem with compulsive gambling. Gambling is socially acceptable. You know, even drinking, when it gets to a point where you're drinking too much, it's no longer socially acceptable and people will talk to you about it. Gambling is quite the contrary. You know, in Michigan, people would have you think that if you're buying lottery tickets like Bernie or you're gambling in the casinos and spending your money, that money is going into the state to pay for the education of the children. Now, that is not a true statement. And it bothers me that the state of Michigan would make such a statement when they know it's not true. They put the money in, but then the other money that should have gone in from the general fund goes to something else. So it's so bothersome that they do that. But here people are led to believe that it's a good activity, it's a fun activity, and you can gamble for years and years not knowing that you're having a problem. And then all of a sudden, my favorite line is about the chains of addiction are too weak to be felt until they're too strong to be broken. And that's the story of the compulsive gambler. By the time you realize that you've got a problem, it's over.
Well, you mentioned March being a month set aside to recognize some of the problems out there, and certainly March Madness is something that generates a lot of interest for people. You know, we see I would think relatively harmless office pools that go on where people win a certain amount of money. I would think that my husband at least is in it, I think, for the game. The money I'm in it for, if there's any at the end. But it seems like a pretty innocuous situation to be in. But for some people, it's not. Even that can be problematic. How do you know? Because as you mentioned, you don't really realize the magnitude of the problem until it's too late.
Usually, you will discover that a person has a gambling problem when the divorce is filed, when the home is foreclosed upon, when criminal charges are pressed, when a bankruptcy is filed, or suicide is committed. That's for a lot of the late stage gamblers. That's when you first hear about them. Most people, let's face it, over 95%, 95% of the people can gamble with no problems whatsoever. They can fill out their brackets, they can have a good time, it doesn't bother them. But there are certain populations that are more vulnerable, like the alcoholics, the seniors. Seniors are extremely vulnerable, and I blame it somewhat on their children. We're talking about people like the three of us who led valuable lives. We gave services to our communities. Our life had meaning. And then there comes a point in time when you get a little bit older and you're no longer working and your children have left and you're off on your own. Nobody talks to you anymore. Well, you can hop on a bus and go to one of the casinos and walk in the door, and the first thing they do is look at you and they say, "Mr. Burke, boy, it's good to see you tonight. I'm so glad you're here." And that makes a lot of sense.
It's that positive reinforcement that gets them coming back for more.
Gives them a feeling of worth again.
Sure.
And all they have to give up is their Social Security and their retirement income.
Yeah, any security for their lifestyle.
Well, it's penny to penny, and that's the thing. It's pennies at a time. And the odd thing is, the only way to really catch it is to see somebody starting to miss events. When you start missing events, or you can't reach somebody, and you know they've been doing some gambling, at that point, if you can catch them and you can get them to admit it, you've got a chance. But a lot of times it goes to the, I can vouch for the thing with the suicide. I mean, I was suicidal for 10 days in St. Lawrence Hospital.
You were?
Yes.
Oh my.
And during that time, when you talked about the brackets, I think I remember telling you this, that I would talk with one of the techs about the different games in the NFL, being Green Bay Packer fan, and the potential of winning money was still in the back of my head, sitting on the psych unit.
Well, what I would think as well, that one of the dangers, and certainly one of the reasons that I don't gamble, is because it would kill me to know that on the scratch-off ticket I would buy 10, it would be the 11th that would be the winner, or that I would get to a point where I would be so desperate to win because I've lost so much that I'm willing to gamble anything. And I would think that there are people out there as well that are playing out of desperation. It's just if I could hit that one jackpot, it'll make all the rest of this okay.
And the term we use for that is the chase. Unfortunately, it's like my book, it's never enough. And so it really doesn't matter what you win, gamblers don't stop. If you saw a person win $100,000 in a casino and never came back, wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? But that's not what the compulsive gambler does. The compulsive gambler remembers that event, and the first thought in his or her mind is, I bet I could win $200,000. It has nothing to do with the money, and that's what makes it so sick and so insane.
And did you find personalities as well where, I know people who they're extremely competitive. They have to win. They have to be the best athlete. They have to be the best leader. They have to do everything. Is that a form of a compulsion?
When I look at it, it seems to be a little bit of that. Because what I was looking at is trying to be when I was younger. When I look back, when I was younger, I was looking to be acknowledged for something. I wasn't a very good athlete, so if I could drink more pop or eat more food than somebody else, that would be a win for me. And that's not
it's just a little encouragement along the way. It's just a little victory, and then all of a sudden
victory here and there. One victory here and there, and that's all it takes. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't even take that, because when I was doing the scratch offs, I didn't care if I won or lost. I was waiting for the time. I was giving myself a certain amount of time. I had to keep myself busy, and that can be really hard to really grasp once you start getting out of that cycle. I had to lose, as Mike mentioned, never enough. With my book, the last part of it is losing your shirt. And that's the shirt of denial. How to be a high roller while losing your shirt of denial. Because it is a denial when you're thinking you're going to do this and all these great things are in the back of your head, but in the front of your head it's all, let's have some more fun.
Obviously, when you say it's not about the money, somebody's paying for these tickets, somebody's paying for this gambling. So when did your families realize that there was a problem here?
With me, it was when I came home and I was on the verge of losing my job. I had to fight to keep my job, and as soon as I got that taken care of, I ended up in the adult psych. But my wife spent time looking at what was in my car. My ex-wife looked through my car and saw things that never made it to her, that I didn't have time to destroy before I ended up in the hospital. But when I got to the point where I almost lost my job and I had to fight to keep it back, that's when everything came out. And
Was that
when
a relief?
After it was terror.
Really?
I didn't want anybody to know, and it wasn't a relief until I started really thinking about what was going on, really processing it, and that took going to my first meeting and being able to walk out of there and walk down to the convenience store and buy a scratch-off ticket immediately after meeting. And I heard stories like Mike's, where they've lost they've spent time in jail. They've done things that they wouldn't normally do. Mm-hmm. And to be able to hear those stories and walk out and buy a scratch-off ticket, I just crumbled after that. It was $1 after that meeting, and that was it. That's when I finally realized it.
Just that one last thing, you just had to get it out of your system, huh?
The one last realization. I mean, like I said, you listen to the stories. If you know the stories and if you've heard these stories, and you can still go out there and buy one.
Sure.
After that, knowing that you've done damage, that you've just spent 10 days in the hospital, that you almost lost your job, and you can still go out there and buy one, it's scary. For me, it was just terrifying. At that point, I was at the point where I had to realize I had a problem.
But you also bought that one ticket and then you stayed, clean after that. I mean, that's a tremendous thing to do. What do you attribute that to?
Sheer terror. At that point when I bought that ticket, it was sheer terror, because all I could think of is the stories I just got done listening to. And at that point I said, I'm not doing it again. I'm not. I refuse to. I'm going to keep in touch with these folks. I'm going to keep working on it. So GA has been a huge part of that success. And,
Gambling is the hidden addiction. If you're dealing with an alcoholic, you might smell alcohol on their breath, bloodshot eyes, slurred speech, staggering gait. With the gambler, there are no outward manifestations whatsoever. A person can gamble and gamble and gamble, and his family, his friends, a lot of times don't have a clue as to what's been going on. I can't tell you how many hundreds and hundreds of gamblers I've talked with across the United States who tell that very same story. It's very easy to hide. And of course, that creates a whole new problem when you get to the point where you're going to start to get better and you're going to start to get well. One of the biggest problems with the family is the loss of trust, because this conduct can go on for years and years and years, and then your spouse and your children and your family members start to think, well, what else don't I know about this person? Who is
which is
able,
natural.
Yeah.
Which is absolutely
what else are you hiding? Yeah.
And so it's a real devastating addiction.
Mm-hmm. What would be your recommendation to people who, on wanting to know whether they have that addictive personality? I mean, is it something that a doctor diagnoses? Is it something that you can look at and say, these are my tendencies and perhaps I have an issue? Is there some way to diagnose it before you get to the point that you gentlemen got to?
Well, one way, and this is something I'd like to see implemented in the state of Michigan. I was talking to you before about the alcoholics. Now, most of us know if we did or didn't have a history of alcoholism somewhere in our family history. Like I certainly did, and many of the alcoholics I've worked with certainly did. Now, if you find that out, and you understand that you have that addiction gene inside of you, stay away from it. Don't go. I would like to see all of the substance abuse inpatient and outpatient facilities in the state of Michigan do simple screenings. I did 8,000 screenings at Brighton Hospital of the alcohol patients. 16% identified with a co-occurring gambling addiction. 16%. I mean, that's 1,400 people. That's an incredible number of people just in one facility. And many of these people were people that we would call problem gamblers. They would answer yes to 3 or fewer questions on the DSM out of 10. Now, there's a group of people we could really help with some counseling and getting them into a GA program and into a good aftercare program. The late stage gambler, we need inpatient treatment for them. Most of them, their lives are devastated, they're just about over and done, and they need to go somewhere where they can get counseling, where they can have somebody help them break that chain of addiction that has them trapped, so that when they get done with that and they get out of that, then they can get into a good 12-step program, they can get into counseling, they can do all of the things, and they're never going to regain their old life. That doesn't happen to compulsive gamblers, but they can get a new and sometimes maybe even a better life than they had before.
Of everything that's happened to you, of everything you've lost, what's been the most devastating?
Oh, what I did to my wife, my daughters, my family, and my community. I was involved in everything and how a person could be involved, and I loved it. The loss of my license to practice law. My oldest daughter's an attorney in California. She's a fourth-generation attorney. I mean, I loved being a lawyer. I loved it with all my heart. Now, having said that, today, this gift that I've been given, my compulsive gambling addiction, has given me the ability to have a book published by the American Bar Association, to travel around the country speaking to lawyers. I was out in Minnesota speaking to their bar last week. These are opportunities and an ability to do something positive, more so on a national level than I ever would have been able to do as a sole practitioner. So it's not all bad, but certainly there were tremendous losses.
Yeah. Well, we were just taking a look at your book, Michael. You also have a book. Bernard, tell us about your organization as well, because you help people too, and I really can't thank you gentlemen enough for stepping forward to help other gamblers out there. So tell us about your organization and your book.
I just started and founded a company called Stand Tall Recovery Services. And my intention there is to get out the word, be able to do speaking engagements. I'm working on getting it so there can be accreditation for it, so that they can get CEs for it, for conferences and that kind of thing. But also the ultimate intent is to get some sort of facility set up where the families can be reunited, because that was one of my big losses. Is my entire, I had the honor of being able to get my dad back before he passed away. But there's a lot of people that lose their family members before they have a chance to make that amend, and that's real hard. So the purpose of that organization is to get the word out, to help people to understand. The book was set up as a starting point for a workbook for people to really take a look at it.
It does have an area where you can actually write, to take some notes for yourself and kind of work through the process. So tell us about the book. You brought it with you. Show it to us.
That's the book. And
what's it called now?
How to Win as a High Roller While Losing Your Shirt. And I called it that, figuring compulsive gamblers, they don't see that last part, the losing your shirt part. And if I can get it into their hands, or I can get it into a family member's hands, and they see that, well, losing your shirt, and they catch on that that's the shirt of denial. Because that's what it is for compulsive gambling. That's what it is for any addict, is there's a lot of denial there until it really comes crashing down. And you lose a lot of trust in yourself, as well as the trust that you've lost from your family. And I was, like I said, I'm happy to have my family back, with the exception of my ex-wife, and to be able to do what I'm doing. Right. And one of the inspirations is the young man sitting next to me, so I can't really...
Well, let me get some information from you. Website, in case people want more information.
Yes, Never Enough at w5.com.
Excellent.
And I'm leaving some of my cards here. If anybody ever wants to talk to me about gambling, if you email me, if I'm out speaking when I get back, I will contact you immediately. I don't think there's ever been a person in the last 7 years I haven't gotten back to, and I'd be happy to help you with your gambling problem.
Excellent. And your website?
I haven't got the website up yet. I'm working on that. They can contact me both by my business phone line, which is 1-517-980-0013.
Okay.
And they can also reach me by going to continuedrecovery@gmail.com.
Okay.
As well as there's a way to access information to get a hold of me through Two Moon Press as well. So.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Good luck on selling your book and helping people out. We appreciate your being with us.
Thank you
It was
so
a
much.
pleasure.
It was a pleasure being here.
Pleasure meeting both of you and working with you. I'd like to thank you for joining us as well. I'd also like to thank Chloe Hill for helping to associate produce and put our guests together here for tonight's show. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you back next time.